Welcome to EconTalk, brought to you by the Library of Economics and Liberty. I'm your host, Russ Roberts of George Mason University. My guest today is Michael Munger. Mike's an unusual guy. He's a professor of economics and chair of the political science department at Duke University. So he's an economist by training, but he's running a political science department. But that's not why he's unusual. I mean, that's just gravy. Mike, what I'd like to talk about today, besides how unusual you are, that's maybe we'll get to that. What I'd like to talk about today are the differences between political decision making and private decision making. So in political decisions, popularity counts. Whoever has the most votes wins. What's the implication of political decisions when it's a majority rule decision like that?
Well, the big thing that political decisions do is award power to the middle. And, you always hear about parties accusing their candidates of, well, you're running to the center, as if that were something bad. If you believe in democracy, then you have to believe that there's some kind of wisdom in the people at the center. So imagine that we had three people, and we were trying to decide what kind of party to have. I don't mean political party. I mean what sort of things to drink and maybe dance. So one person just would like to have a boom box and some big 40s of malt liquor. One person might like to have a DJ and buy some wine and beer. And one person might like to have a band and scotch and all sorts of setups. But the three of those people have agreed in advance that what they're going to do is be bound by the decision of the group. And then the question is, what would they do? And it seems like you'd need to be in the room to decide. One of the cool things about modern public choice theory is I know in advance who's going to win that. It's not magic. I just know that the middle is going to dominate that. So the person in the middle was the one who wanted to have a DJ and just beer and wine. And the point is that so long as everybody can propose what they want, the guy who wants less won't take any more than that. It'll be 2-1 against. And the person who wants more won't take any less than that. It'll be 2-1 against. So there's no alternative that will beat that middle, or what public choice theorists call the median.
So in that example, we've got somebody who's the cheapskate, the sort of middle person, the extravagant person.
Uh-huh.
So you're saying that the middle person's proposal, and not just the middle person's, we're ruling out compromise here along friendship lines or whatever. We're assuming everybody feels very strongly about these expenditures that they're going to share. So the cheapskate wants a low-key party. The extravagant person wants a blowout party. And the middle person wants sort of this in between. So the claim of modern, what you call public choice theory, which is the interface between economics and politics.
Yeah, that's where I live.
Right. Lucky you.
Well, you said I run a political science department. I'm mostly running after it.
Yeah, it's the old herding of cats. So these three people, if they're not going to compromise, and they're only going to vote what they really care about, you're saying that the middle person always gets his or her way.
Yep.
Now explain why that's true again.
Well,
exactly what that person's perfect desire will always be what wins the election, and everyone else is going to be disappointed.
And that's the other thing that I think we should emphasize before I go back to try to explain it. We're talking about a situation where a group of people have decided in advance that one and only one solution is what we're going to do. So there's some kind of one-size-fits-all.
All right, we're all going to the same party. You can't have a quiet party while I have a fancy one.
Right, and I can't just have a party by myself.
Right.
They've decided that they're going to party together. The only question is how much are they going to spend. The other thing is they've also agreed to pay 1/3 of whatever size of a party they go with.
Mm-hmm.
So you're betting with house money here. You're whatever we decide, we're going to share the cost three ways.
Well, that sounds fair, and so in that intellectually appealing set of rules, what's the outcome?
Well, let's suppose that the cheapskate person says, let's do what I want. And the other two both want more than that, so they'll vote against him. And let's suppose that the person who wants the blowout party says, let's do what I want. The other two that want less will vote against him. Let's suppose that the cheapskate person votes for the middle minus $10.
Well, let's pick some numerical examples. So we have let's say we have $100 party, which is let's make it even cheaper, a $50 party, which is the boombox.
I've been to parties with you.
Hey, that's not the one I want to go to. So we've got the $50 party, which is just the cheapest one. Then we have a $500 party, which is the DJ with nice beer and wine. And then we have the $5,000 party. So it's 50, 500, and 5,000.
Yep.
That's the 5,000's got the band, it's got a bar, bartenders, hors d'oeuvres, etc.
Yep.
So 50, 500 versus and 5,000. your claim is that the 500 one always wins.
Will always win.
Why?
Let's suppose that the cheapskate stung from his recent defeat at asking 50 and being turned down 2 to 1. Says, okay, I know what I'll do. I'll propose 490. We'll go almost up to what the 500 that the middle guy wants. Well, surprise, the guy who wants 500 prefers 500 to 490, and of course the guy that prefers 5,000 prefers 500 to 490. So even 490, as close as the cheapskate can get to 500, still is defeated 2 to 1. Now let's suppose the rich guy says, well, my 5,000 got defeated, but how about if I propose 600? Well, the cheapskate likes 500 better than 600, and the middle guy, of course, likes 500 better than 600, so that one loses. The point is anything other than 500 will lose 2 to 1 to the middle or the 500 proposal.
I have to interject though, Mike, that the 5,000 preference might not be the rich guy. It might just be the guy who really likes to dance to live music and really likes good liquor.
Right, and wants to have extra Manischewitz.
That's exactly right. Yeah, 2 bottles, please.
Yeah. Chill.
Watch yourself. So the middle person has, and in this story we've got 3 people, which is unrealistic. So when you have a major population, an America voting on, we don't decide by referendum very many things at the national level, except for president. But if we think about politics generally as having the most votes is what counts, the things that get proposed that are closest to the average or middle person are the ones that are going to dominate the political landscape.
Yep, and so we might call what public choice there is called, that is the median. It's just exactly the average, the median. And so there's a dictator out there somewhere, and he's median Joe. He's not average Joe. He's median Joe. We may not know quite who he is, but proposals that appeal to him, and it could be median Jane. But the things that propose to meet that appeal to median Joe or median Jane are the ones that dominate the political discourse.
And of course, they're not literally dictators. If they decide they want something extravagant or cheap, they're suddenly not in the median anymore, and they don't get their way. But that middle block or that cluster of preferences around the middle is able to garner a majority because of the its ability to defeat proposals on either side.
Yeah, nothing else can defeat it, and it might be frustrating because you might want something more. You might want something a lot more, and you think you have a good argument. But I don't know if median Joe is going to listen. He might be watching Survivor, Fredericksburg.
Right. That's evidently a popular show. So yeah, that's what me and Joe and me and Jane watch. It's a nice example, actually, because uh, you would think that we'd all be stuck with Survivor if TV choices were the same as political choices. So every night there'd be Survivor and American Idol and nothing else. TV doesn't work that way, does it?
It doesn't work that way, but I have to say I'm old enough that I remember when CNN used to show news and MTV used to show music videos.
The good old days, yeah.
Yeah, but now TV is actually coming closer to that also. You're trying to maximize market share. And a lot of if you look at A&E or the History Channel, even National Geographic, a lot of what they show is about aliens now, because that's what a lot of Media and Joe and Media and Jane want to watch. Now, markets do work differently from that, because we don't all have to watch the same thing. And
right.
I think that's where you were going.
Yeah, that is where I was going.
We don't all have to do the same thing.
And if you look at, when you were going back to the good old days, I thought you were going to go back to the, see, I don't know, I don't think you're old enough. How old are you, Mike?
I'm 48.
Yeah, okay, I'm 52. So, you are old enough to remember the really good old days. You know, back in the 19th century. No, I mean back in the middle-ish part of the 20th century, when there were 3 or 4 channels that you got, and of course the choice and variety on TV in those 3 or 4 channels was very small. There was restricted entry. Basically, you couldn't just start a TV channel. It was heavily regulated, and as a result, the only things that could survive in the marketplace had to be extremely popular.
Yep.
But with the explosion of cable offerings and satellite, now the potential for niche channels like the Food Network or the History Channel,
or some really great dramas on HBO,
right,
where you can take chances.
Totally different, and that now the TV landscape more mirrors the automobile landscape, the food landscape, the shirt landscape, the clothing landscape, the shoe landscape. Much more diversity, much more variety, not the one-size-fits-all of the political marketplace, but more importantly, the choices are made differently. Talk about that.
Well, the way that things work in markets are there are 2 differences. One is that every consumer gets to make his or her own choice, and so the power of the media doesn't matter as much. Also, the offerings that we get are the result of maybe someone who has what seems like a really strange idea, thinking maybe I could make money by doing this, or maybe I can become famous by offering this product that's going to change people's lives. So as a result, we have to worry about is can I make revenues that exceed my costs by doing this within a few years.
And of course, revenues can exceed costs in lots of ways. They can exceed costs because so many people buy something that's barely profitable, the so-called making it up on volume, or because you make a product that only a few people want, but they're willing to pay a lot for it. And so you can cover your costs on a small group of people because your margin's large. So there's
if I'm a business person, I may be able to make money by saying, here's a really good idea. Now I'm going to issue stock. And some people say, well, that is a good idea. Now, most people still vote against. Most people don't buy your stock. But if enough people buy quite a few shares of that stock, then you have enough working capital that you get your chance. So I think the big difference is that in the public sector, we've all agreed in advance we're all going to pay into this. Whatever decision is made, we have to pay. In markets, if I have an idea, only those people who agree with my bet are those who are going to commit their money. And if they win, they make money, and if they lose, they lose their own money, but they're not playing with house chips.
And I have to convince a different type of person. I love your distinction there between the middle and sort of the potential fringes, the people who are passionately excited about an idea. So if I want to get an idea going in the public sector, whether it's welfare reform or subsidy to some new innovation or some regulation that is supposed to make the country better, whether it's a minimum wage or whatever it is, I have to convince large groups of people, and essentially that involves convincing the middle person. Whereas in the private sector, in the marketplace decision, I just have to convince enough people, not a majority, and certainly not the average person or the typical person or the median person. And that has some important implications for what emerges from political decision-making versus private decision-making.
Because in political decision-making, I'm working on what economists call the extensive margin. I have to convince a whole bunch of people. In markets, I'm working on what we might call the intensive margin. That is, I have to convince them not just that it's right, but they're going to bet their own money on it. They'll actually say, yes, here's $1,000, here's $10,000, here's $20,000 of mine. And so, as a result, markets in those circumstances have a pretty good track record for innovations or changes or new ideas that might change a lot of our lives. People have a real reason to try to investigate and say, is this going to work or not?
And yet most of those ideas aren't good. A lot of new ideas, new products fail. So why do you say that markets work well? Rhetorical question. Go ahead.
Sure, and I think there's two ways. There's two ways of thinking about this. Let's think about the wizard that we all admire, the conventional wisdom. The reason the conventional wisdom is conventional is that it's usually right. So we've got Joe Median sitting on his couch saying, I don't think that's going to work. The problem is he says that about everything. He always thinks things aren't going to work. And most things don't. Most new ideas are just terrible.
Right. Having that skepticism is a good rule of thumb.
But in the sense that it classifies most things correctly. But there's one time that it's always wrong, and that is a good new idea. The conventional wisdom never recognizes good new ideas. It usually recognizes bad new ideas. So the question is, how can we come up with a system that punishes bad new ideas and rewards good new ideas without putting all of us at risk? And that's what markets do.
Tell us how. Give me an example.
Well, I saw an invention the other day. It was designed to keep your dog or cat happy if you had to leave for a week or so. And it was an automatic petter. They called it the Petaway. And I think it cost $1,000, and your dog or cat would sidle up to it, and this plastic hand would come out and pet the back of the dog or cat and say, "Good doggy," or "Good cat," and you could record your own voice for this. It turns out that it didn't sell very well, and it disappeared almost immediately.
Is this a real product?
I'm not making it up. Google it. Google it, pumpkin. You'll find it. Away. Yes, sir.
It's a repulsive concept. I can see why it would struggle to make it in the marketplace.
A lot of repulsive things don't struggle, though. I've pet rocks, not pet away, but pet rocks made a lot of money.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't get to decide. You don't get to decide. Somebody makes a bet with their own money, and if people like it, they win. If they don't, they're the ones who pay all the costs.
But your general point is that if we put new products up to a political decision and a national referendum, because of the skepticism of the average person, which is a good general rule of thumb.
It is correct on average.
A lot of good new ideas
all of
and
them.
Bad new ideas would be rejected.
Yep. All good new ideas would be rejected is the problem.
And as a result, putting those decisions in the political marketplace basically empowers the average person, whereas in the private marketplace, the power is in the hands of the risk taker, who often overestimates.
Yeah, usually.
Often overestimates the likelihood of success because most of them fail, but not all of them do. But I want to come back to your claim that the median person is skeptical. Aren't there some ideas that surely are so obviously great that people are going to recognize them, and if they were decided politically, we'd all get behind them?
I wish that were true. There's I think some bad ideas about regulatory policy and education that the median person believes that are just false. But there are some products that we now all take for granted that at first the median person would have rejected. Can I tell you a story about two Steves?
Sure.
Well, some of you may know this story and you may recognize it before I go too long, but in the late 70s there were two Steves that were working in a garage in California, and one of those Steves worked for Hewlett-Packard and the other one worked for Atari. And they had an idea that they could build a box attached to a TV screen, and that people would be able to use that in their home for recipes, maybe for communication, drawing things, watching movies.
It's a stupid idea, really, isn't it? A box that you I mean, you already have a TV. Why would you want another? And one of the things you might do with this thing is I guess type up documents, but you've already got a typewriter. I mean, why would you want this thing?
None of it makes any sense. And had I seen one, in fact, I think I remember in the late 70s or early 80s when the Apple I first came out, because these Steves were named Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. When one of these Apple I's came out, I thought it was a terrible idea. They priced these were personal computers, the first personal computers. They priced them at an odd pricing point, $666.66. So
what year was that roughly?
That was 1976, right at the end of 76.
$666.66. It's catchy.
It's a satanic pricing point.
Yes,
They were trying to get attention, but the more important thing is you put that in current dollars. That's $2,400. $2,400.
Well, that's what a computer costs today, roughly, isn't it?
It's what a paperweight cost then, because this computer had no memory, no fixed memory, and 16K of RAM.
16K.
So your cell phone is about 10 times as powerful.
Unbelievable.
And yeah, they wanted $2,400 for it.
They didn't sell like hotcakes.
They didn't sell very much, but these two Steves were too stupid to realize that they had no chance and that this was a bad product. So they started offering Apple IIs and Apple IIIs, and the Apple III, I think, is a landmark of optimism. In $2006, I think it came out in 81. It cost $9 They wanted $9,000. Now it did have a little bit of fixed memory, and you could use disks in it. And they had a mouse. These were the first mouses, I guess. Maybe mice.
I think it's mice, yeah, but not really. It's probably mouses, yeah.
But and so this is crazy. A $9,000 computer. It still wasn't as powerful as your cell phone, and these two nuts, clearly doomed to fail, had a public stock offering in 1980, and a bunch of other nuts, although not that many, bought 4.6 million shares. So that would lead me to think, wait, maybe the median person isn't so dumb after all, because a fair number
a lot of shares.
Yeah, but it's only 4.6 million shares, and even if people only bought one share and they didn't, that still meant that 97% of the U.S. population either thought
it was a bad gamble.
Terrible. I'm not going to bet on this, and I wouldn't have. Heck, I was alive. I didn't.
Yep.
I was trading in stock at that point. There's no way I would have bought stock in Apple. What a stupid thing. I bet you're glad you didn't buy any.
Oh, of course. Although I did buy an Apple Classic early on. I think it was 1984 or 85.
I wouldn't have picked you for an Apple guy.
And it is a paperweight. It's sitting in my basement, cheerfully resting on its laurels.
Well, so
that computer could hold, I think, an 8 or a 16-page paper per file. So if you wanted to write a 30-page paper, you'd write the first half, save it as a file, and then you'd open another file for the second half.
Actually, I think rewards to brevity like that would help a lot of my students.
Yeah, that was a lost opportunity. We should have regulated that. We should have said that's a good rule for the future, and mandated it.
You live close enough to D.C. I bet you can get that in a bill.
Definitely. So that idea, which was a stupid idea, turned out, well, not to be quite so stupid.
Everybody,
the personal computer.
Yeah, basically, everybody thought it was a bad idea, and it wasn't just median Joe that thought it was a bad idea. You could find a lot of quotes from people as late as 1977 or the mid-80s that said that there's the president of DEC, Digital Electric Corporation. This is the guy that made computers.
It's a powerhouse company of its day, actually. It's kind of interesting. It's a fascinating thing that it's gone, but it's
huge.
In its
time, capitalized company.
It was a dominant company with tremendous innovation.
Yep.
It was a very, very successful company.
Their reaction to this was there's no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. That was that's Ken Olsen, the president and the founder. So a guy with some vision. And the cool thing is he's absolutely right in every unimportant way. For years and years, nobody did want a computer. 95% of the American population for years and years voted no. Nope, we're not going to have one of those.
And the cool thing is that all of us who voted no, we weren't held to that.
Nope.
We got to enjoy. Right, we get to enjoy it now.
I think free riding is one of my favorite activities.
Yeah, you don't get to do it that often, but when you do it, it's sweet.
Yeah. And so, yeah, now we can't imagine doing without personal computers. But if we'd done it by voting, if we tried to say, we're going to appeal to the middle, we're going to appeal to median Joe, what do you think about this? Well, no, we don't.
Subsidize it, say.
Well, suppose that
or have a national.
Subsidizing was the only way that you could invest. That was the only way you could finance innovation. It wouldn't have happened.
Well, let's talk about that. You know, when communism was a going concern, I guess it sort of is. It's on its last legs. It appears
outside of American English department.
Yes, still very popular there. It still has. If you've never lived under communism for some reason, I guess it's a lack of imagination.
They're very empathic, though.
Yes, they are. I mean, I find it fascinating that when Elian Gonzalez was forced to return to Cuba, so many people thought that was a blessing, that he would be raised in a allegedly non-materialistic society. You know, actually a society that's desperately poor, and I suspect quite materialistic as a result of that poverty.
You don't have the burden of all that property.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an easy life, but it's strange. You know, the people who are passionate about that, none of them are emigrating to Cuba. Most of the traffic seems to run the other way. People who want to live under materialism rather than the allegedly more beneficial communist society.
Yeah, so not many people now would advocate a system where we only used government funds for innovation, but still.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, but still, a lot of people say we need to increase government funding for research. We need to increase government funding for regulatory policies where we look at what processes, chemical or otherwise, would better serve for drugs.
Right. Well, in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of among elite opinion, some of those university departments, not so much the average person, but among elite opinion, we were encouraged to emulate Japan.
And this was even in business schools.
Yeah.
So this wasn't an English department. This was in business school.
But it was in universities. So it was similar. It was a small fringe of intellectually
people who never worked for a living.
Yeah, people who never worked for a living and thought too much of intellectuals, I think, as Hayek has pointed out. But what advocated was a closer alliance or cooperation between government and business, so that the right products would get invented, like they are in Japan, say. Tell us a little bit about Japan.
Well, the interesting thing about Japan was that the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, in the 70s and 80s had the reputation as really being able to pick winners, and a lot of the explanation people thought for the Japanese miracle, the huge expansion in exports from Japan, and new products, good products, was that it was the guidance of what Japan called an industrial policy. So the debate in the United States was, should we have something like an industrial policy? But I think that story, which is a fable, doesn't really bear scrutiny. So I have one more little story about a guy named Soichiro. And what MITI had done, what the Japanese government had done, and this was really, Japan is a market economy and a democracy. So it's not that they're a communist country at all. It's just that they wanted to use MITI and Joe to try to decide what would be best for the entire country.
Not literally. They didn't put up these decisions in a national referendum, but they used the political process, which does empower MITI and Joe.
And it would have been possible for somebody to run against it if anybody thought it was a bad idea. So the Japanese public was fully behind this. They thought it was an excellent idea. And what MITI had decided to do was that they needed to streamline. They needed to make competition a little bit simpler, and they wanted to have their automobile companies be able to realize the economies of scale and production. Things get cheaper as you produce more of them, and so this idea of economies of scale came to dominate their thinking. They thought we need fewer automobile companies and have them produce more, and that'll make us more competitive on world markets.
Such a seductive idea.
It makes perfect sense in every unimportant way.
Yeah.
And so they picked two. They picked Toyota and Nissan, and that would get all of the financial support that the Japanese government was going to give. And the other companies were told that you could do something else. You can make motorcycles or blenders or those television things. So you guys run and play, and we're going to let the grown-ups, the big companies, they're the ones that really know the most about making cars. But there was this one guy, Soichiro, and people that knew him will describe him as he's a prickly guy. He was a difficult person. He was terrible politically, and so it's unusual for a Japanese businessman. He didn't spend a lot of time drinking sake and playing golf. He didn't really like people. He was a misanthrope. But he had a vision. He had a vision particularly of high performance, high revving engines, and he made motorcycles. His company made motorcycles, and they and he thought this would really work well for a car. It would get high mileage, it would be high performance, very lightweight and small. And when he heard this from Meaty, that you're not going to be allowed to do it, he fought the decision and actually managed to get Meaty to agree that he wouldn't have to stop producing cars, but he just wouldn't get any public funding. And they assumed that that meant that he would immediately go belly up. Well, so Ichiro's last name is Honda, and you've probably heard of him. 1959, they introduced their first automobile, the S360, which was a sports car, an open-top sports car. And it wasn't great. It sold pretty well, but it sold really well in Europe and the United States. And the reason was it was extremely cheap, and the performance was remarkable. It performed almost like a race car. Now, when you think of a Honda now, you actually think probably of Meaty and Joe. So here we are, free riding again. A car that a lot of people would have thought that won't work because they don't have government funding and they don't have these huge economies of scale. As you produce more, it gets cheaper. Honda now is a very standard car for people all over the world. It's one of the largest sellers, and had the government of Japan had its way, Honda wouldn't exist.
So the vaunted cooperation between government industry maybe isn't quite as romantic as we're told.
No, Mr. Honda, in fact, hated the government and fought them every chance that he got, and as a result, that was why he succeeded.
Now, most people aren't as enamored of Japan as they once were. All those folks, I always find it fascinating, and all the people who told us we should imitate Japan and have more government business cooperation, which I think it's just a remarkably bad idea. I mean, it's hard to imagine a worse idea of.
I don't think we should have the Department of Motor Vehicles in charge of motor vehicles. Yeah,
that's a beautiful way of putting it. It could be a bumper sticker there. And those on the other side could have the bumper sticker, let the Department of Motor Vehicles be in charge of motor vehicles.
Yeah.
That's a slogan everyone would rally behind.
If that's the opinion, if that's really what they want.
But you don't, it's interesting. I was just going to say that it's strange to me that the people who told us how great Japan was and how we ought to imitate them, they're quieter now. You don't get a lot of mea culpas out of those folks. They don't concede publicly that they made a horrible set of policy recommendations. Now that, even though it's obvious now that it's a horrible set of recommendations.
Well, Russ, I think you're being unfair, and here's the reason. markets themselves and market processes are an innovation that's hard for the average person to understand. It's hard to understand the fact that individual people acting in all these different contradictory ways add up to something that benefits us all. It doesn't make sense unless you've thought about it quite a bit. The public education in economics in the United States, I think, is pretty deficient. So it's easy enough to blame people, but I actually think they're not convinced. They still think that government planning and a kind of one-size-fits-all solution to everything, even regulatory policy, is the way to go.
Well, I want to come back to that, but I want to stick with this point about what's attractive in today's political world. So there aren't a lot of people outside those English departments who think we ought to have a command and control economy, a top-down communist state. There aren't a lot of people now who think that we ought to have a government consortium with Detroit, say, because they understand that the incentives there are going to get messed up. I think people have either, because of that theoretical understanding about incentives, or because Japan has been struggling for now about 10 years or so of mediocre economic performance, the glow is off there. People aren't as excited about that, but you still see lots of enthusiasm for one-size-fits-all government-mandated solutions. Give me some examples of that.
Well, I think in the United States, we don't think enough about the fact that there's a boundary line between what's mine as an individual and what's ours as a group. And so if we think we have a problem, the first solution we have is to ask ourselves, what are we going to do? I think the first question you ought to ask yourself is, why do you think there's a we? Why do you think that a one-size-fits-all solution is the right answer to begin with? And I guess I can think of a number of examples that may seem a little jarring to someone who hasn't thought much about markets. So, well, imagine that instead of having a policy, one of the things I think that's going to come down the pike pretty soon is some sort of uniform standard, a national standard for ethanol. So we want to have less dependence on foreign oil.
Well, we've got that standard now, right? There is a minimum amount. Every gallon of gas sold in the United States, I think has ethanol in it, doesn't it?
I don't know if it's at the gallon level or at the company level, but there has to be a certain amount. But it's going to be more.
There's a push for more because it's supposedly going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil and save energy because it's so efficient.
Why not do this? Why not have a pump where one of the buttons that I can choose is the mix that I want between ethanol and gasoline? Why do we need a standard at all? And if I don't want any, that's okay. If I want ethanol, that's okay.
Well, I think the claim would be, I don't think this is really what's driving our ethanol policy. I want to come back to that, but I think the claim would be, well, you might selfishly choose no ethanol, let's say because it's cheaper, but you'd be ignoring the externalities, the harm you're causing others when you choose all refined oil, petroleum, and buying, quote, regular gasoline and that's ethanol free. You would be ignoring the pollution you'd be causing and the dependence on unstable foreign regimes that might subsidize terrorism and the instability in the Middle East. So what ethanol does is by forcing a national standard on people, we force them to take account of the consequences of that decision. That seems like a nice idea.
If those things were, well, if we're not all persuaded to the same extent of the correctness of those things, so suppose that a lot of us believe the argument that you just made, we're welcome to buy ethanol. Having a one-size-fits-all solution means that even those of us that aren't convinced have to do the same thing. So I guess I would say the answer would be, if you think that the problem is ethanol is too expensive, let's put a tax, a larger tax on gasoline, and then just let people choose their own mix, not have a one-size-fits-all requirement.
Now, that's a great example. I can't help but bring up that when the catalytic converter was required of all gasoline, of all cars are required to put a catalytic converter on.
Yeah.
And the goal is a very good goal, clean air. The idea would be just the one we've been talking about, that if you had to pay for a catalytic converter, you'd always have a temptation to avoid the cost and let other people breathe the dirty air. You'd be breathing it too, but your contribution would be so small that you'd rationalize it and say, I'm not going to pay for that. I'll let other people pay for it, and then no one would buy it. The air would get dirty. So the argument was, we have to require a catalytic converter. It's an interesting argument. It's a good argument on the face of it. Of course, at the time, it turned out there was a car, actually turns out to be a Honda, that met the clean air standards of the time without a catalytic converter. But Washington required Honda to buy the catalytic converter as well, even though their engine was clean. I'm sure it had nothing to do with the fact that American car company, I think it was GM, but I'm not sure.
It could have been Ford.
I think it was GM had the patent on the catalytic converter. And so this was just a political payoff to a special interest. So here's an interesting case. This is a subtler version than what been talking about. The average person thought, yeah, clean air, that's a good idea, and we should force people to do that because on their own they might make the wrong choice. They were convinced of that logic, just like the case of, in theory, for ethanol. I don't even know if it's true for ethanol, but in theory, it's reasonable for the average person to feel that way. What they forgot was that the actual implementation of that took a different form, which wasn't, in the case of the catalytic converter, let's require all cars to meet a certain standard, which would have been fine as a justification, justified
we
by...
could have measured it. Every year when you get car inspected, it has to meet the emissions standard.
Right. But instead, they said every car had a catalytic converter. The point, the case of ethanol is exactly depressingly analogous, which is if we really are convinced that ethanol is good for America, then let's level the playing field between ethanol and non-ethanol gasoline with a tax on regular gasoline, and let people choose then whether they think ethanol is good for their car. But that's not the way it goes.
And if they're right, their car will work well. If they're wrong, their car will blow up after 100,000 miles.
And of course, I think the other issue is whether it really saves energy or pollution, because you've got to produce the ethanol, which requires energy.
Yeah, and petroleum-based fertilizers.
And of course, you've got to. It's not clear if it can't compete in the marketplace. There is an issue about the pollution. I want to put that to the side, but on this pure issue of whether it saves energy, that's, you don't need a government regulation to impose ethanol. It should be able to compete and do just fine.
Yeah, I may not care about pollution, but I'd like to save energy. It saves me money.
Yes, it does, and we have a natural personal incentive to do that. There's a related issue of alternative technologies for driving cars. You know, this fashionable idea that we should subsidize hydrogen cars to reduce our energy dependence. Is that a good idea?
I think it's unlikely that the government is going to be able to pick out the particular technology that is going to work best, just like for personal computers. So subsidizing hydrogen fuel cell cars to the exclusion of other things is not likely to get us the best result. I mean, maybe we could have some sorts of subsidies at the basic research level, but I would rather have two mics working in a garage somewhere, trying to develop a new technology that they can make money from.
Yeah, that runs on, say, turkey carcasses, which I think is actually
I was going to tell that.
I think it's a substitute. I hate to give it away.
I haven't patented it yet.
But there is, I've seen it. I just don't know whether it was a hoax. I've seen it in a real magazine. I think, I'm not sure which one, that you can actually produce energy using turkey carcasses.
You know, Russ, some people wouldn't believe you. I do, but some
Thank
people
you.
wouldn't.
Well, that's another thing to Google. Google turkey carcass
Car.
and And if you don't find it,
Yeah.
it's because you probably misspelled carcass.
No,
but I think it's true. And if maybe we'll put a link up at the at EconTalk.org. If I can, I'll Google it myself and spell it correctly. I want to come back to something you said that I hadn't thought about that I think is extremely interesting. And I've got my own. It spurred a thought of mine. I want to let you talk about it first. So you said something really strange. You said the average person who's busy with Survivor and paying the mortgage and making sure the kids are clothed and fed and all those things that distract us from deep philosophical thoughts. The average person is skeptical of new good ideas like the computer or a new kind of car or iron-free, wrinkle-free shirts. Whatever that new idea is, trivial or sublime. But the average person is often entranced by bad new ideas. There's an asymmetry. Actually, the bad new idea that came to mind when you said that was light rail. Light rail is, I think, a really horrible idea. It's unbelievably expensive.
I can't believe you're being like that. I would like to have cheap mass transit. That would please me.
That's because you're a median kind of guy. I'm out on the fringe with my Apple computer, and I'm a big Honda owner too, by the way. Long time Honda driver. But light rail, a living wage, a law against smoking. These are things that appeal to folks sometimes because I think they think that they will achieve what they are supposed to achieve when in fact they don't, or sometimes because they think they'll achieve what they do, and they do achieve that, but it's still not a good idea. But let's take the ideas that they think are good, they think that they'll achieve what they're supposed to achieve, but they actually don't. So they sound good on paper, but like many private ideas we've talked about, they don't work very well, and yet they often persist. Why are these ideas like light rail, and I'll pick the living wage as another example, why does the average person find them so attractive when they don't find the new private idea like a computer or some new product innovation attractive at first?
Well, Frederick Bastiat said the state is designed to allow each of us to live at the expense of others. All of us like the idea of getting something for nothing, but we hate to take it from other people. But so long as it's provided by the state, it seems like an excellent idea. So, living wage, we should mandate that people have enough money to live on. That makes a lot of sense.
And have it be paid for by...
Well, the state. We should have the state pay for it.
Yeah.
Let me give a simple example that I think would surprise most people, and the reason I want to do it is that it's so simple. Airbags. How could you possibly complain about airbags?
Mandated airbags.
Mandated
not
airbags.
Privately offered
Well,
airbags.
Of course it should be mandated. You know those automobile companies are. They're not going to do it unless we make them. So what we're going to do is put airbags in the steering column of every car, and that'll make everybody safer. I want to propose an alternative. I want to have Tulloch airbags, Gordon Tulloch airbags, instead of the standard ones. And Gordon Tulloch airbags are a 10-inch ice pick. So I'm driving along, and I hit something, and I jam my body into the steering column, and a 10-inch ice pick comes out of the steering column and goes through my body.
This is my colleague, Gordon Tulloch, here at George Mason, who is has perhaps the advantage of not having formal training in economics, and has therefore made some incredibly interesting and provocative contributions to
I think he was
economics.
kidding. I think he was kidding when he proposed this. With Gordon, it's hard to tell.
It is hard to tell.
Well,
but it's an important. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. It has a non whimsical side to it.
What would the effect be on safety? Well, I would drive really carefully. And in fact, suppose you live in Washington and you're driving on 66. You're trying to get home, and traffic is packed, and there's those guys driving by you on the shoulder.
Yeah, I love that.
With the Tulloch airbag, they probably wouldn't do that, because if somebody just barely pulled out and they nicked them, they'd have an ice pick through them.
Yep.
Accidents would go down dramatically. There'd be a huge increase in safety. It's not at all obvious that making cars safer doesn't have a discounting response in behavior, because people say, well, my car is safer. I don't have to behave so safely. People are going to choose their own level of risk. So mandating that all cars have to be safer enables risk-taking behavior that may endanger all of us.
So that's an argument where basically people have difficulty understanding the unintended consequences of a public decision like that, right?
I think willfully that they would like to think airbags make sense. Let's all do it. And if someone is more risky because of it, well, that's wrong. That would be immoral.
Right, and so we'll ignore that possibility, even though there is evidence that that's exactly what is happening.
There's actual empirical evidence.
As cars have gotten safer, people do drive more recklessly.
Yeah. I actually have several colleagues I'd like to put a Tulloch airbag in their car.
So
that's a different question, though. I'm sorry.
So they, I'll assume that's just so they drive more safely.
I'm worried about their safety.
Yeah, you're always looking out for others. I appreciate that, Mike. It's part of the reason I think we're such good friends. But I want to raise a different possibility because I want to go to that light rail story. I want to stick with that, or the living wage story. In the case of the light rail, the living wage, besides this sort of general idea that we're, quote, doing good with public funds, although in the case of living wage, it's not exactly public funds, a public mandate. It's going to be funded by
consumers.
By consumers, ultimately, of the products that are now going to get more expensive because of mandated wage increases. But what's going to happen in this case is that there's going to be a coalition of two groups: the people who are naive about the impact, that is, the so-called do-gooders, which include most of us, right? A lot of us want the world to be a better place.
Given the opportunity to do good, sure, I'd like to do it.
Me too. So the light rail's good because, well, that's gonna reduce pollution. Light rail, public transportation, trains or trolleys, they're going to have lots of people on them, and they won't be in their cars.
It reduces congestion and
it's going to reduce congestion, pollution. So on the surface, it seems like a good idea. Now one problem with the idea is the unintended consequences, as you point out, and just the general measurement problem that, well, maybe it won't work out as we think. Maybe it won't reduce congestion because it won't be too very popular. Maybe it'll turn out to be a lot more expensive than we thought. Maybe more people will move into the city as a result of this, and that'll create more pollution elsewhere, congestion in other streets, etc. So there are all the complexities of this are obvious, and it's also obvious that when you're not spending your own money, in contrast to Mr. Honda, who we talked about earlier, your incentive to discover whether these claims are true is much smaller. So public decisions are going to find it easier to make mistakes along those lines because the incentive for you to acquire the necessary information to make an informed decision is going to be very small. You're going to be spending that time on Survivor, the mortgage, your kids, your spouse, and as a result, oh, it sounds good. I'm for it. There's that other part, though, that's really nasty, which is the special interest, the manufacturer of the rail cars in the light rail thing is going to be out there, and this is a part of a theory that I've heard Milton Friedman talk about, Bruce Chandler at Clemson has spoken about it. It's the bootleggers and Baptists. It's the self-interested people who want to ban liquor on Sunday because they want to sell their illegal, still produced alcohol, and they ally with the high-minded moral Baptists who are against drinking because it's the work of the devil. So you've got these environmentalists who say, well, this light rail thing's going to be great because it's going to reduce pollution, and then you have at the same time the not so attractive group of folks, the manufacturers of the light rail, who have a vested interest. And the problem is that those light rail manufacturers are going to encourage media coverage and studies that's going to get to average Joe and Jane and make them think, yeah, this is going to be great, when in fact 7 people ride it even at the peak.
Yeah, the benefits are so concentrated that it's easy for those groups to organize that are for, and the costs are diffuse and unknown and hard to discover, and so the rest of us just go along.
So what's a body to do? What can we do about this, Mike? Any optimism here?
Well,
I always like to end on an optimistic note.
On the living wage question, it's becoming less and less implausible in a lot of people's minds. The big beneficiaries, I think, would be organized labor, and the people that would lose is probably those people who now have minimum wage jobs, because if you raise the living wage to $14, $18, whatever number of people have picked, that's the new hourly wage. You'd have job gentrification. So people, well, gentrification in a neighborhood is, as property values start to go up, outside people who are wealthier buy the property, and people who've lived there for a long time get pushed out. If you have janitorial jobs for $18 an hour, then someone with marginal job skills, someone who may not always show up on time, and you're not as good at working at that job as someone who would be willing to work at that job for $18 an hour. Those jobs will be gentrified. The poor people that used to work in them will be gone. They'll be unemployed, and either organized labor will benefit, or the people who can move from other jobs to those newly attractive janitorial jobs. I guess I have a hard time being very optimistic about this, even if we'd like to end on an optimistic note. The problem of concentrated benefits and diffuse costs, and the fact that we tend to opt for one-size-fits-all government solutions instead of those hard to understand and unpredictable market solutions, is probably with us to stay.
No doubt, but I do think there's some grounds. Let me add some optimism, and you can react
That's pretty
to it.
bad if you're the optimistic guy.
Well, I'm an optimist at heart. I'm I'm an optimistic cynic. I don't think it sounds like an oxymoron, but I understand this political problem that we've been talking about this whole time, which is the political process tends to focus on the average person, and when you add in the special interests on top of that, the average person is going to have there's a temptation for the special interests to deceive and dissuade and manipulate the average person, which leads to political outcomes that are can be pretty gruesome. Or even without
I'm waiting for the optimistic part.
Even without the special interest, the average person is not well informed, and as a result, often advocates things that are bad ideas. So I think for me, the optimism comes in a couple places. One is people do learn about really bad political ideas. So even though there's a romance about socialism and communism, it's pretty much off the political table in the United States. What's considered? Let me maybe say that more clearly. It's off the table. Very few serious people advocate the communist model. And I think that's for a simple reason. The appeal of it's still there, which is we're all sharing. It's not motivated by greed. We all decide for each other. It's a beautiful thing, except we saw it in practice. It didn't work very well. Millions of people were killed as a result. And there are people who then respond and say, yeah, but it's never really been tried. But even that argument just doesn't carry the weight it used to carry. It's just dead. And I think price controls are dead in the United States of the direct kind. We still have a lot of indirect price controls. We talked about this in a previous podcast with Milton Friedman. But price controls are dead mainly due to experience. Anybody who was alive in the 70s who knew anything about life saw that price controls on gasoline in the 70s led to lines, violence in those lines, unbelievably unpleasant experiences trying to plan something because you didn't know whether you could get gas or not. And so even though we had gas go up to $3 and more a gallon in the last few months, there wasn't a demand for price. Some people demanded it.
Yeah, there were calls for it.
There were calls for it. Some politicians grandstanded about it, but it didn't happen. It didn't have enough political traction, and I think it didn't because even though the average person can't draw the graph that I get my students to understand about price controls, didn't matter. The average person just had a skepticism about it. So I think the living wage is a good example. I think the idea of the living wage is very appealing to people, but a very short amount of logic, like the logic that you just provided and some experience can dissuade people from it. And Mayor Daley in Chicago just stood up to the city council and vetoed a living wage ordinance in Chicago that was going to apply to big box retailers. I don't think he did that because he's a principled person who believes in markets. We have lots of evidence to the contrary, or that he believes in economic freedom. He did it because I think he believed that the average person in Chicago understood it was a bad idea, even though it was there was some romance behind it. So there's I think we make some progress.
Well, I hope you're right, and I have to say that activities like this podcast that Liberty Fund is doing, I hope contributes to that kind of economic education.
That's a lovely thought. Let's close there. My guest today has been Mike Munger of Duke University. For more EconTalk, go to econtalk.org, econtalk.org, where you can comment on this podcast and find links and readings related to today's topic. I'm your host, Russ Roberts of George Mason University. Thanks for listening.